Welcome back. Well, let's get some conversation going on about what transpired in the House yesterday. We've got Honorable Uzoma Nkema Bonta, former Chairman, House Committee on Public Accounts, joining us from our studios in Abuja. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today on the program. Well, this scenario leaves a lot of questions, and to some extent, a lot to be desired, because many now ask, yes, it was supposed to be a probe of the NDDC, but the way it's turning out, now they're asking questions of the members, the House of Reps, in fact, the legislature, as a matter of fact, saying, how did they get themselves here? Because the regard that the narrative should be for the National Assembly is being eroded. This is not the first time. Remember the scenario with Festus Keyamo, and now you have this. So what's going through your mind at the moment? How did you get here?
Oh, well, what we are seeing is brazen, is unspeakable. It shows the level at which there's disdain for the legislative arm of government. I will liken it to, or what I will call, the continuation of executive rascality. Be it as it may, legislative arm is an arm that is empowered to do the necessary things, like you've quoted copiously 88 and 89 of the Constitution, subject to people's human rights, I must say, but for ministers or people or persons appointed by the executive who are summoned legally to come and defend their actions or what was entrusted on them to work out on Parliament shows it speaks volume, and it should be curbed, because if it continues to go on, then we are going to face a total breakdown of law and order. I don't see how a head of a parasol or an agency or a minister, so to say, will ordinarily work out on Parliament. You can express what you don't agree. You can have your mindset. You can say a thing that say, look, I don't agree on this. But to get up and walk out and damn them means a total disregard, and it's a rape on democracy. It's an insult on the Parliament. It means you're disregarding a constituted authority. Of course, legislators are an arm of government who should ordinarily regulate.
Can you speak to
or monitor
the reasons,
and in course of doing that constitution?
Just hang on a minute. The reasons why that happened, because can he normally just do that if they didn't have their facts? Because he accused the head of that committee of grafts, of several things, as you heard in that report. So he says, look, that should be investigated. Remember, this is not the first time that the members are being, or at least a member has been accused of grafts, doing something illegal. So isn't that the reason? Is this reason not justified why he had to walk out?
He can't justify that. Like, stated at the same time, said, look, with the committee, we are just hearing this for the first time. If you have any complaint, make it available. He also said of criminal activities against NDDC. He ought to have stated to say, you did this, that, AYZ. Therefore, we are not going to make a presentation and then find out what will be the reactions of the committee. You merely said a thing and even said nobody can give a point of order, nothing like that. You watched the clips again and stood up and took his book and left. Well, let me give you an example. It had happened in some other times and so on. For example, I also watched when you talked about Arumote. Arumote talked about Hembe and sat quietly to watch her dad come. She never walked out and stormed out. Play the clip again, you see how brazenly they stormed. That means, what can you do? You go to hell. That is
no, but
of course, it is right to say, because of what we think of you, we do nothing, we'll get fair hearing. Therefore, don't chairman this and watch and see. But he never even stayed to get a reply, a response of what the committee will do. You don't
Honorable, you know that,
for example, through your lawyer.
Members of the NDDC had been accusing members in the House who had chaired several committees of the NDDC of graft over time. And if they didn't have any reason whatsoever, why did the Senate change course? They changed a little strategy in going on with that. So why didn't the House follow suit?
That is what they will ask for. But if you say that you are not appearing before the committee, watch what he said. We don't think that this chairman should be the chairman. Otherwise, we're not going to make a presentation. At that point, he ought to have kept quiet and stayed and watched what would be the outcome, or then say, but to walk out, that means you walked out on the committee, which is a continuation of the sittings, but you didn't walk out on the chairman. You would have said, I'm not going to talk if this man is presiding. But I agree with you that the House ought to have come back and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to ask the chairman to step aside or otherwise, but to walk out without giving the House any chances of revealing what he said. After he said an allegation, we are called upon and said, can we have the particulars of the allegations? Can we have the kind of graft? It's not just put a blanket thing. Aramonte said, Mr. Hembe, on so day we gave you so amount to go and do this. Did they do it? On so we did it. But so we need to know. It's just to come to say we are not going to see because you've done some criminal activity. You should give the particulars of it and watch what the House will do. Senate, in their wisdom, at the floor of the House, say no, let us use ad hoc committee to do this investigation. Quite good. I will also suggest that, in fact, that the Senate and House should even do a joint sitting in the same National Assembly to do this investigation. Because from what we also hear and read, and from the testimonies coming out, we don't have to sweep anything under the carpet. We need to do our oversight function. More so, this is an investigative session. The House, at the plenary, gave that committee the functions to go and do. If, however, NDC does not want the chairman, fine. It is their right to say, we do not think we can get justice from you for the following reasons, and give us the particulars of the reasons. It's for us to have an in-house that says, okay, chairman, this is what we think, or otherwise. But he never gave us chances. He rather argued and said, no point of order here, you can't do anything, and stormed out. It is brazen. It is not good for our democracy. It shows a extension of executive rascality, because he came there by virtue of being appointed by Mr. President. So,
well, if you talk about executive rascality, or what about those who think that there's also legislative complicity? Because, I mean, if you heard all of those things, if Senate did something, why did the House have to wait up until now? There are several members of that committee, in that committee, who could have even had an ad hoc or chaired it, such that this would not happen. So they said, you brought this on yourself in the first place.
No, well, I agree with you that they can make a complaint and say, we are not going to sit before the House. It's coming for the first time. But the manner of presenting that complaint wasn't that at all. Let me tell you, we've known people accusing houses severally, just like accuse anybody, just like accuse Mr. President. If we look at those accusations, then are we going to shy away from our duties? If he said, mind you, he never complained about the whole committee. He said the chairman will have no problem, but the chairman will not sit. Therefore, he will wait and see what we're going to do. Meanwhile, that investigation had gone almost 90%. It's not the same chairman he appeared to do the budget.
But, you know, that's the thing.
So,
because even if he went 95%, as long as there's a loophole that there are issues that they can, of which they can raise questions, you give them an opportunity to do that. So, as it is now, what do you think should happen with that investigation, having been faced with these allegations that have been raised by the NDDC?
Think that the House should do an in-house work, either excuse the chairman and then continue, because I don't want to say it's an attempt to buff or stop the investigation. If I don't want to join issue with the Nunes attempts to be kidnapped, so to say. Therefore, since he said we don't want the chairman, we will think whether the chairman will step aside and then the investigation continues. Except he's saying the whole committee or the House shouldn't do it at all. But if you don't want a judge, you will complain. Either the judge is transferred and so on. Are you complaining about the whole court? The complaint is not against the whole committee. Therefore, I think the wise thing to do is to excuse the chairman. There's a deputy. The other members, they are competent. They will go on. So the investigation will come.
Isn't it time for the members to have a word amongst themselves, such that they don't portray or give any agency of government any reason whatsoever to even have opportunity to raise these kind of issues? Because we're talking about how many issue incidents in less than a week or two, wherein agencies of the executive arm of government have questions of the legislature, which has got to do with graft. So it doesn't leave a good image for Nigerians who elected the members to do a job for them.
I agree with you. the issue of graft should also be investigated. Nobody's above the law. They should come up with the particulars. Let me give you an example. That of Festus Kayamo. We all saw it. Was that graft or procedure? They called him to question him on the manner of employment. And he said they want to hijack it. No. And if you talk about representation, who represents the people? If you're employing 1,000 persons from a local community, well, and you think members should not be part of it, and saying, do you know the poor people in my home? Are you better positioned? Is first time better positioned to know the poor people in Akwete? Okwa? No. So if it's graft, please, they should be investigated. Members, senators should be investigated if you think about graft. But if it's purely administrative matters or supervisory matters, fine. Now, in this present one, I don't know where they complain about graft. If they do, it takes two to tango to graft. If they ask you for graft, please report to the agencies. Make it public. Arumote said, Mr. Hembe, so happened. Did you travel? If you didn't, and so on, you demanded for this. They should come forward with it. Did Kayamo say ask him for money? Or anybody? Did the NDC chairman say members of the committee asked him for money? If he said the chairman asked for money, he should make it available. Some of us will frown at that. We don't want so.
Well, they were questioning the conduct of the members of the members of those committees that were asking questions, who were supposed to be oversighting them of ulterior motive. So, as it is now, where does this leave this investigation?
Just like Mr. President asked for a speedy completion of it, I should think that the committee should take cognizance of the complaint of the NDDC, remedy it, and go on. Because except they will succeed in their attempts to stall the investigation. Otherwise, if the chairman is the problem, he sits aside. And mind you, it's done publicly. So you will see why it's a public investigation. So the people will now see, is there anything that is done unethically and so on. So the way forward, I think, is if the NDC says we can't see the face of the chairman, we don't trust him, he will ask him to stay aside, let the investigation go on. Except they are saying all members of the committee should not be there.
Why do you think the members of the public, why should the members of the public have faith in the legislature to handle this one, especially if they remember how the Herman Hembe matter went, and one wonders what became of that allegation against them in the first place?
Oh, there are two different scenarios. If you look at it, that one we are specific in what we are saying. Here, he made an allegation against the chairman. The committee is the people who understands the ongoing. That is their committee. They oversight them. They know what they do. So they've asked them now to do the investigation, and they are going on. And they came up to say, we don't want this chairman. Is the rational thing to do not to say, chairman, okay, you step aside so that we go on. He is one person in the panel of more than 20 or 30 persons. He is one person. Others give their testimony. Accountant General came there, CBN came there, Auditor General came there, the banks came there and supplied material, papers, and so on. They never talked about the conduct. But if they have issues with the conduct of the chairman, fine. Let him sit aside and let the work go on. It must be completed for the benefit of Nigerians. And it's done publicly, so we'll be able to see. Meanwhile, they're asking of figures and paperwork. It's figures and paperwork. Put them together and tally them and show us what did you do with SEY's fund. It's on ground. And look at procedures. And that's all.
Okay, well, I think Mr. President was asking about speedy completion of the forensic audit. So whatever else the House or the National Assembly is doing, I think it's always up to them, because I don't think he can direct the House of Assembly or National Assembly to do certain things. But let's get a legal perspective on this matter as well. We've got Mr. G.T. Ogunye, a legal practitioner, joining us on the line this morning. Good morning, Mr. Ogunye. Thank you for joining us and giving us at least your time to speak on this matter. Could you tell us, having seen or read perhaps the way or what transpired in the National Assembly yesterday, wherein the acting MD of NDDC had to walk out on the House committee investigating this matter, accusing the chairman, Honorable Ojo, of having guilty of some crimes and such, they didn't think they would get fair hearing by the committee chaired by him. Now, in that context and the action taken by the NDDC to have walked out, Is that the best thing they could have done? Is it within their rights? And should they have walked out on that committee?
That shouldn't have happened. By the benefits of international television programming, we can see what happens in other climes, particularly in the United States, whose presidential system of government we copied. We see how hearings at the Congress is conducted, and we see how people, periodically are sent to prison for lying under or before Congress. Roger Stone has just been pardoned by the United States President Donald Trump. He was accused of lying before Congress on oath and was sent to prison for that, was prosecuted for that. So we need to take government more seriously. The laissez-faire that governs government affairs in this country is a cause for worry, and in particular, what happened before the legislature was a desecration. That shouldn't have happened for a government agency. I mean, sometimes the National Assembly overreach themselves by inviting civilians to appear before them, particularly when they are criticized. So when they do that, we condemn them for that. You can still recall how the Senate was trying to harass Professor Isesagi the other time. I should come before them for criticizing them. But for a government agency that is under investigation, I mean, it's so ridiculous that kind of thing could have happened. Walking out with that because they have opportunities. If you are accusing the leadership of that committee of bias, of not guaranteeing fair hearing before that committee, you can walk out. You can put your thoughts on paper. You can hire a lawyer. You can do many things to protest to the leadership of the House of Representatives that, look, you lack confidence in that committee, in its leadership, and you provide particulars. I mean, that's not a motor park. That's not a village square meeting. In a village square meeting, people behave in a more decent manner. And what's going on, if you ask me, is a manifestation of general a general way of doing things, of conducting government business.
So many will then ask about the quality of the people who are in governance. For instance, now, I mean, they've also said, look, they don't see the president ever walking out on the National Assembly whatsoever, no matter the situation. So why will agencies of government do this? Now, the statement that was released by the president, where he talked about speedy conclusion of that forensic audit and the rest of it, should he have spoken about this, or should there be some sort of at least reprimand or an action taken against any government agency who acts in such manner which the president will not conduct himself in?
I recall that when the president was presenting the budget before the 8th Senate, this is the 8th National Assembly, the last time, not this time around, there was a particular session, after he just coming from one of his overseas trips, and I can recall that. There was so much terrible heckling, noise making in the National Assembly. The president could have used that as an opportunity to walk out. If a former military man, and they're supposed to be short-tempered, right? But he didn't do that. And people commended him for that, for being state-manly, right? So I'm saying that when this kind of thing happens, it's not just sufficient for the president, who is the executive president of the country, who was voted for. Many of the people, whether minister or all these people doing all this stuff, weren't voted for in this country. They are appointees, the one who voted for. So in terms of representative democracy, the primary beneficiary of a mandate. And so they ought to be more responsible. So the person that we voted for has that duty to say, this will not pass. This will not happen. So that when acts like this are done, that there should be some kind of censor, some kind of sanction, some kind of administrative reprimand. So it's not just sufficient for the president. And I'm saying this doesn't have responsibility to just issue a statement. No, don't do this. Don't do this. The president is an executive president. He's not an advisor in chief. He's not supposed to be occasionally giving advisory on how government affairs should be conducted. He's supposed to take action and swift action when necessary. I understand that sometimes the members of the legislature, the way they do, particularly in terms of carrying out oversight function, visiting agencies and all that. Some of the agencies have always been complaining about when they want to visit them for oversight functions. And they'll be running all over the place. Our representatives are coming. The chairman of my committee is coming and all that. What that implies is that they'll be running around to get money, to get envelopes. And these news get out, right? But I'm saying that in spite of those possibilities, in spite of those allegations, in spite of the fact that we know that this kind of thing usually happens.
We appreciate your thoughts this morning, GT Ogunye. Thank you very much indeed for talking to us this morning. Honorable Abonta, let me get back to you as we wind down on this one. What is the committee's thought or position on what transpired in Port Harcourt, where the acting former interim ND, Joy Nunye, was supposed to appear, and there was a failed, it turns out, it appears as though it's an abduction attempt which failed. What is the position of the House on that now, the committee?
Well, we are trying to also get her, the House will want her to come and give her testimony publicly to the hearing, so others can also ask her questions direct and live. We wanted to also say, do it online, do it visual, but should that not work out, we'll get her to come and talk. Once it failed, why would they want to stop her from appearing to testify? You can see, you can read, underline it. So our position, or the House position, or the National Assembly's position, the Nigerian position should remain that she should come and talk. She's a necessary person. She's a necessary witness to testify what happened. What did she do with part of fund? Because she had been the ex-MD. During the time of her tenure, in the short while she served, what did you do? What happened? She had knowledge, so she must come to talk for us to conclude the investigation. Of course, we've been hearing all the publications and all whatnot. We've read, we've seen. So she should come and present it, so we can also ask questions to verify the veracity or otherwise of what she's claiming.
Just some quick one before we go. Since there's the president has spoken about this forensic audit, so if that's going to happen and it's concluded and then there's a report of such, why is the House or the National Assembly looking into this? What's going to become of their report if there will be a forensic audit?
Missing it. The House is looking at from January to date. Forensic is looking 10 years behind. We are looking at the money appropriated for January till date. That is the mandate of the committee. We're not going backwards to 2019, 2018, but the forensic is 10 years behind. While we are looking at a particular period, January till now, where we said over 80 billion naira can be accounted for. So we're not, forensic is doing theirs. Well, the House will also do that. It's continuous. How is the oversight function?
All right. Do you agree with, let me put this in.
To July.
Do you agree with those who say that, perhaps these investigations, the House, they're not usually able to put their foot down as they ought to, because their members get contracts awarded to them by some of these agencies who then feel, look, if I've given some members contract or given them some sort of jobs, why are they questioning me? So that weakens the legislature.
I will insist that legislators should put their foot down. If you give a legislator contract, mind you, some legislators may be their businessmen before this time or otherwise, or their constituents are doing business and all whatnot. But the issue is, don't go and give graft to a member because you think he's supervising you. Prove the facts. Show them. Bring them. Expose such things. You shouldn't overreach yourself by your office.
All right, Honorable, we thank you for your thoughts.
You don't use that to say.
Pardon me, we're out of time.
We should not do our functions.
We do thank you very much indeed. That we hope that all of this is sorted. Honorable Uzoma, Chairman House Committee on Public Accounts. We're back in a moment to talk on a very interesting matter. Don't go away. Welcome back. Well, having seen what played out yesterday and what has played out before yesterday, we've seen the investigation or questioning of Ibrahim Magu. We've seen several attempts of what's going on, the House of Reps, or the National Assembly, questioning agents of government and how they conduct themselves, questioning the oversight function, the intention, the motive. So we just look, it's apt to review where are we in this fight against corruption. It turns out that ICPC, look, 20 years on now, a significant milestone, isn't it? But the activities of those anti-graft agencies, activities of governments across board, are they on the same page? Are we moving ahead to ensure that we give the country a direction to say, look, this is what we want to do with a fight against graft? So we've got two gentlemen to weigh in on this matter. Our Rafsanjani is the Executive Director of CISLAC, joining us from Abuja. Also sitting beside him is Cletus Obum, who is a former member of the Cross River State House of Assembly. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us today on the program. Well, Mr. Rafsanjani, let me start with you. I mean, keeping tabs, everyone sees what's playing out in the politics. We know the stance of the government. It was one of the mantra, one of the tripod, in fact, of their stance or their campaign message whilst they sought elective office. So give us your impression. Having seen what we've been doing, where we are today, how would you rank our efforts at tackling graft or reducing it to the barest minimum?
Thank you very much, and good morning, viewers. The current Nigerian government indeed, campaigned vigorously during the election period to say that they want to fight corruption. And of course, Nigerians were really sick and tired of the public official, misconduct and looting. And when the government, come to say that they want to fight corruption, definitely people would like to, support them. But unfortunately, in the process, the government itself has not, it appears to me, they have not sat down thoroughly to look at how they will fight corruption and what are the key issues that they need to deal with. Government do actually give priority to asset recovery, but asset recovery is just one out of many areas that needed to be given attention in the fight against corruption. So because of that, civil society organizations in Nigeria vehemently campaign and canvass to have a national strategy on the fight against corruption, which will center basically in the area of corruption prevention, which will also ensure that there's an enforcement of sanction, and also an anti-corruption drive that will be focused on educating Nigerians about the consequences and implication of corruption, which is very obvious, which leads us to where we are in terms of collapse of public institutions, even collapse of public services like education, health, access to water, even the infrastructure. So Nigerians, were really eager to see that this thing is done. And then more importantly, again, the campaign to have ethical conduct and reorientation for Nigerians on the fight against corruption, as well as, of course, the recovery of, proceed of corruption, which is, of course, the assets recovery. So these 5 key areas
Okay.
If government had given attention to it, I think we would have been able to make better progress in the area of the fight against corruption.
All right.
But government, unfortunately, ignore fundamental corruption areas.
Mr. Osnijani,
like
just pardon me.
Political.
We'll explore that a little further, but let's also establish the perspective of Mr. Obum on this matter. So, Mr. Obum, tell us, I mean, there's a school of thought that believes that people will judge this government harshly because it was their mantra, fighting corruption. So, in terms of the leaders, political leaders, leading by example, has that been sufficient such that the people can indeed say, yes, I'm willing to follow their lead because they are leading by example?
Yes, I'll tell you this. Let me begin this program by saying that half of the time, and what we are dealing with here, the corruption we keep shouting about is excessive concentration on the federal government. When we talk about anti-corruption, we are dealing with Buhari, APC, and the federal government. Most of the time, we forget that even if the entire cabinet is made up of angels, or Americans, or Israelis, and they are doing well, as long as the states and other tiers of government, the state and the local government, the institutions, and other stratas of government, and even private life, even the private sector, is engulfed in corruption, it is like a sea of salt. No fish coming out of salt water can ever taste saltless. Therefore, you must deal with this. And that is why this morning I want to say that I have been trying to investigate privately as a journalist, as an academic, as a Nigerian interested in what is happening. And across this country, I came across a state that has tried to institutionalize anti-corruption. And that state I discovered is no other than Kano State.
Before you get that, before you take that a little further, pardon me, before you go a little further, so having said that, do you then think that the federal government has led, or government across the board have led by example themselves, their agents or agencies? Have they led sufficiently by example, having seen the actions they've been taking?
Clearly, please, in the last 20 years of our democratic experiment, there have been more convictions of government officials, high-profile convictions in this government than all the governments put together. The last time we ever saw this was in 1984 under the military regime of this very same President Buhari. And today, you can agree with me that more governors have gone to jail, sitting senators have gone to jail, more people in government are being on trial, not just on media trials, but in court of competent jurisdiction across the country. And there are no sacred cows, such that even the first casualty was the SGF. No other points to the image of government than the Secretary of Government of the Federation. Today, as I speak to you, the first victim of anti-corruption was the Secretary to Government of the Federation, Babachir David Lawal. Okay. And of course, you have seen others going. Today, we are dealing with the Magu matter, even if I insist that the Magu matter is a different kettle of fish. We will also agree with me that a high-profile person of that nature is on trial. That does not mean that the past 4 chairmen of EFCC have not gone through the same way, but the manner in which it is being done shows.
All right, there are questions as to,
by example, from
there
the
are questions as to the events,
ministerial positions. Everybody is on trial, and everybody is facing the same.
Even though there are questions as to
anti-corruption,
the events before that, but let me bring in Mr. Rafsanjani to give his perspective on your view that, well, it appears from what you've said, all is well. Mr. Rafsanjani, do you share the same view?
Well, the problem that we have is that this government is not a government that is formed on the basis of ideology. So you have just simply rice and beans. So we have crooks and criminals and people who genuinely want also progress in this country. They came together to capture power, and therefore it is difficult for those who want this country to move forward to be able to convince or control or bring in programs that can help, deliver successful anti-corruption fight, because like you rightly mentioned, at local government, at the state level, and even at the federal level, you have different people with different agendas. So there's no unity in terms of agreement that we need to fight corruption as a political party, or as members of the political party, or as governors, or as even ministers and House of Rep members or senators. There's no consensus, and that is why the government is not able to move, in the manner Nigerians are expected, because not many people in government share the same opinion and perspective, or maybe perhaps the president, who times out numbers, say he wants to fight corruption. The rest of them, they appear just to be doing what they want, and there's no effort to deal with that in a very institutional and systematic way. And that is why it is difficult to actually, in a very fair way, to assess this government, to say that the leaders of this country or the leaders of this government, all of them are on the same page. It is extremely difficult to pass that kind of fair judgment, because there are different interests, there are different groups with their different agenda. Many of them, they don't believe in anything called ethical or anti-corruption or any good governance. As you can see that from the local government to the state, and even at the national level, every day you hear cases of corruption from the same political party. So if the political party has a conscious effort to deal with the corruption beyond just slogans, I think it should be reflected at the local, at state and national level of all its official, and by so doing that, they will be able to galvanize public support and be able to get every Nigerians on board. But I think there's a different groups and interest groups that made up the government that are not necessarily in the same page or on the same page with the president. And that's why the fight against corruption, we cannot say that all the public officials are leading by example, because of this variation of interest and agenda. Many of them, they don't simply believe in, fight against corruption or good governance. Many of them, they still embezzle, they still steal, they still, organize all sorts of organized crime to embezzle money, and they do a lot of drugs, they do a lot of things, which is part of the problem that we are facing. And that's why I said, if the Nigerian government, in its fight against corruption, had focused on other important areas that they ignore, for example, political corruption. It is corruption to rig an election. It is corruption and criminal to also, ignore public procurement law. It is also corruption to continue with this security board, which is not accounted for, which is more than put together, all the money required for the Nigerian security sector to operate. So defense corruption is there. Nigerian government doesn't see that as much as important, as assets recovery that they are focusing more.
Pick up from that point. They
don't also see corruption in the other public sector like health, education, every now and then.
Just hang on a minute.
That, but not much
I'd like to bring in Mr. Obum on that, at least from that perspective which you just spoke about, which takes us to states. You've spoken about political corruption, rigging election, and associated kind of acts. Mr. Boom, why did you use Kano State as an example? Because many will be quick to remind you, wait a minute, isn't it the same states where there were videos of the governor said to be taking bribe, which people are still talking about till today? Why on earth did you use Kano State as an example?
Precisely, one of the problems we have in this country, again, is what I referred to earlier on as media trial. I use Kanu here to show the paradox of what media, especially the bastardization of the media, especially social media, as against the regular media. Those videos are already a subject of litigation. It's before a competent court of jurisdiction in this country trying to get into the cyber crime of simulating those videos. So I am not going to dwell much on it, but I will use that as an example of how public figures and tapes and even video and modern technology have been abused, especially in the social media. Kanu, because I use Kanu deliberately because I am investigating, and I'm going to continue to do this to show that Kanu can become a model for Nigeria and for other tiers of government, especially the states. We keep concentrating on what the federal government is doing. Kanu has what we call the Anti-Corruption, Public Complaints and Anti-Corruption Agency, Commission, headed by a very young and obedient lawyer, Muhuyu. Muhuyu is one of those people that Governor Ganduje is using in Kano State to interface and intervene in the activities of Kano State government in terms of anti-corruption. How did it happen? Such that even prices, hoarding of food items during Ramadan and especially during this lockdown, if you remember how Kano became almost first and was competing with Lagos State in terms of the COVID-19, today Kano is almost at rock bottom and they are almost flattening their curve. And again, you find that in Kano, they are building an institute of anti-corruption only second to ICPC and EFCC. Their staff are being trained in EFCC Institute in Karu and the one in Kefi.
I hear you,
and as I speak today, at the local
just
government,
a minute, hang on a minute, let me just put this in.
Each local government in Kano has that agency.
How did you come to the conclusion that those images on social media are being bastardized? So, and then you say you're investigating. So is your investigation supposed to be superior to that of the anti-corruption agencies that we have in the country? Because people have seen it and they have come to their own conclusions.
Now, coming to those conclusions is one thing. Having the facts is another. I am telling you that those tapes were simulated. I insist that because they are in court, I'm very much aware, because in the course of going into this matter, I discovered that the matter is in court and they are treating it as a cyber crime because those images was... In any case, who was Ganduje before he became governor? That all the money you are bringing to a governor enters an agbada. When governors and other people are known to be carrying Ghana must go. Does that not show you, first of all, that it even cheapens and trivializes the entire issue? But like I said, I'm not going to go into that. The cyber crime agencies and the investigating agencies and appropriate authorities of this government are investigating that matter. If the man is having immunity now, he is ready to waive his immunity on that matter. At the appropriate time, when the investigation come out, you are going to see what Ganduje is going to do with that. Clearly, what he has demonstrated is that his anti-graft agency is one of the vindications he has to show that every local government in Kano has these commissions members represented, at least 3
Mr. Bom,
volunteers.
Before I get to Mr. Rafsanjani on this one,
in court.
There are many who will always tell you,
already in court by that commission.
Just hang on a minute, let me put this in. There are many who will always say, look, well, could you give them, is there an example in this country of any governor or even president that set up an anti-corruption agency and then the agency investigates the governor or the president who set them up and finds them guilty? Many say, look, that you don't see that happen and they don't think that it's even going to happen in the nearest future. But Mr. Rafsanjani spoke about security votes and conduct of politicians for elections, which will send messages to people. So if, assuming that what you say can be relied upon in terms of the conduct of persons in office, security votes, if he was that free, why wouldn't he just say, this is how much I get for my security votes. It's transparent, and I'm willing to ensure that this is used for certain things. So would it be out of place if the governor were to do that?
Now, I say this to you. When you talk corruption and start saying President Buhari and start saying Ganduje and start saying governors, the intentment of corruption,
I'm talking about security votes, please.
There is political security votes. I am saying to you that in terms of Ganduje and, of course, the rules governing the security votes across the country, from the president down. I remember, for instance, a governor in Sokoto also, who was not collecting his security votes for 8 years as governor and was collecting no salary for 8 years. He put it back.
Could you speak specifically to the question so we can
I remember that.
This.
And Ganduje is one of the few governors.
I'm asking, would it be out of place for him to publicize it? To demonstrate that, look,
if there is such a demand, why not? If there's such a demand, why won't he do that? If there's such a demand, for example, he would definitely show you that his security votes is even going straight into the state coffers and not even to himself. He doesn't withdraw it. You can cross-check this on...
Mr. Rafsanjani, okay, Mr. Boom, just a minute. We need to manage time now. Mr. Rafsanjani, you know, is it a question of our laws wherein they say, look, well, if the law doesn't say otherwise, why should we publicize it? As he says, if people demand, then he can act.
Chamberlain, you have to remember this is a public funds. It's not a private funds. Everything, anything that has to do with the public is supposed to be publicized. It's supposed to be known. In fact, as a matter of fact, this security board, it is not audited. It is not oversighted. It is just a pre-money for some official who have access to this security board to pocket this money and use it to finance their own election at the disadvantage of other people within their state or at the federal level. But the worst part of it is that even government agencies that has nothing to do with providing security and safety, you see the large amount of money that they do. We publish a detailed report on the security board, and this is the report I'm showing again, which shows how government officials are siphoning this money in the name of security board without providing any security or safety. Look, we cannot say we are fighting corruption and we are not even paying attention to this huge amount of billions, of naira that is going every year, annually. In fact, if you look at the amount of money that is going into the security board, we have over 241.2 billion naira annually, taking just from some other few government agencies, taking more than money that is required for police, navy, and air force, and then you say you are doing security board. What security board are you doing that even your police, you are underfunded it, the army and the air force put together, they do not have the account of money that this so-called security board is involving? We have to be serious. If this government, which has another 3 years, if they want to really refocus and redesign its fight against corruption based on the strategic plan on the fight against corruption, which is supposed to be finishing in 2021, and yet it is not operationalized, we need to use the opportunity that we have now to bring some level of sanity and programs that can actually prevent the corruption from happening. Why must you spend 1,000 naira to clear or to recover 200 naira when you can actually prevent it even from happening? So I think across the board, like he made reference of Kano State Public Complaint Commission and Anti-Corruption, this is a good initiative to have such kind of thing in all the state of the federation. And I thought that APC, Muhammad Buhari government, should have encouraged all the state governors, at least under APC, to have such kind of institution which will work not only on haunting, not on the basis of haunting their political rivalry or trying to just use it to do other abrogada thing, but to really, truly help to ensure that public education on the anti-corruption is entrenched on people. Orienting Nigerians about the implication and consequences. Let me bring this in before. Currently, it's only ICPC that has educational program in its fight against corruption. Code of Conduct Bureau is one of the government agencies that is supposed to be fighting corruption, but the government is not even giving attention to its work. Asset declaration is one of the major corruption area that the government at state and federal level has not given attention to.
Okay, so
oil and
here's what we'll do. It's time for break. So just give us a moment. We'll return and focus on that bit before we wrap it up in just a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back. Well, let's get back to this conversation. Mr. Boom, we do remember that on the 5th, in July 2017, a federal high court which sat in Lagos did order the federal government to immediately release to Nigerians the names of public officials or high-ranking officials from whom they had recovered certain assets, monies, assetware, such that they know. So tell us, ever since then or till date, is there anywhere, have you seen that happen where you can go in and see that these are the names of people from whom certain assets have been recovered from in compliance with the court order, and in order for them to demonstrate transparency to show that, look, this is how transparent this asset recovery or anti-graft agencies activities are? Have you seen anywhere?
You are giving unto me a responsibility that is not mine. It
a
is
question, not a responsibility. The responsibility just to answer the question yes or no.
No. When you box me into that, how do I become the spokesman for this government?
You were a spokesman for Ganduje just now. So why can't you speak about this?
No. Yeah, I'm speaking about it. The court gave an order. Somebody went to court. Our court system and our jurisdiction, our jurisprudence is adversary. That is to say, somebody must challenge. It is not enough, like the American system, where you just go for interpretation. Here we are asking that somebody takes an action. Somebody went to court. Under our laws, the Freedom of Information Act, you can demand any information from any public institution and get it. If you have got that, what you need to do next is to go for enforcement. Has the person who went to court got for enforcement? That is when we all will benefit from. I will also benefit from it because I also want to know. So I think that I have not seen it. It is not to my knowledge. But if it doesn't exist, the person who went to court has a right to demand for the enforcement of that.
Have you seen
because I'm not
anywhere?
Sure, I'm not so aware that.
Are you deliberately trying not to let me put the question in?
I have not found it anywhere. I insist. I have never cited it. Never cited it. The person who took the action has a right to go for enforcement and demand to get a copy under our Freedom of Information Act.
So,
therefore,
if that's the case,
been done, it has to be done.
If you haven't seen it, just let the question go so you can go back and forth so the people can follow us properly. So if that hasn't been complied with, so don't you think then that naturally people will then ask questions as to, so what's there to hide? If doesn't it then leave people tongues wagging saying, look, there's a lot of focus on asset recovery. Some even think that it's about transferring resources from one to the other. If the court has so ruled, why don't you make it a lot more transparent so people can follow the process easily and seamlessly?
This is the point I'm making, that I have not seen it. The person who went to court, the litigant, has not, if he has not seen it, has a right to proceed against those government officials who are in possession of that information. It is their right, and it is a court of competent jurisdiction, and it is a right of Nigerians to know who looted what and what was recovered and what is in their treasury. It is our right as Nigerians. As I sit, I am very eager also to see it. If it has not been done, it has to be done, and the courts have to enforce their orders. Otherwise, court orders will be mere music.
So, Mr. Rafsanjani, how should we approach this then, such that people don't get the wrong impression about, all activities of the anti-graft agencies? Because if they don't comply with this, whatever the reasons that they give, how should we approach this to give people the right impression?
Well, like I've always said, one thing that the government need to understand is that part of the fight against corruption is to comply with, court orders, and also ensure that you do not abuse the legal frameworks that we have in the country. If you decide to choose which law to follow and which one not to follow, then you would not be able to really, institutionalize fight against corruption. Secondly, on the issues of assets recovery and management as well as utilization, we have been canvassing and advocating as well as advising the Nigerian government that, look, you need to have a legal framework in place that would be more transparent, more accountable. As it is now, we have a bill in the National Assembly that is, poker bill. If this bill is passed, it will have resolved all this controversy that is even surrounded about the allegation of Magu not accounting for XYZ. I think the absence of this law is what is creating room for the allegations and in some instances for the truth, about how, properties or assets that have been recovered, right from the previous regime to date are not accounted for. There's no central data today where you can go and find where are the juries, the gold, the estates, the houses, the cars, the cash that have been recovered. No information either from the police or from the custom or from the ICPC or from the EFCC or from the drugs law enforcement agency, because these are all agencies that are all of them, taking, asset back. And because the whole thing is becoming like the most juicy job to do, that's why there's a deliberate effort to ignore other aspects of corruption in the country. For example, we've been talking about corruption in the oil and gas sector. NAITI, government agency, had been establishing or producing reports showing how we are losing money. No effort to recover those money. We have seen how, people are using, public taxpayers' money to finance their political campaign. Nobody is dealing with that aspect. Government for the first 5 years have refused to do reform in the electoral system in place. There's no way you will be fighting corruption where procurement process, which was one of the major corruption areas, in this country, and up to now is a major source of corruption. You have refused to properly implement the public procurement law. You have freedom of information that you ignore all the times. You have, corruption in the security sector. That is why many Nigerians are losing their life. Because
let me bring in this, Mr. Rafsanjani.
Reform in the security sector. These are all part of the corruption problem we have in our governance in this country.
All right. So, having looked at governance and or whatnot in terms of what they have to do, how they've not performed it, room for improvement, let's bring it back. We the people. All of those appointees of government, wherever they are, whichever year, 20 years ago, however long, they are peopled by Nigerians, those appointments. Have we, in our own little way, in our own small corner, can we say that we are actually doing our own lot to ensure that, we see transparency, things done properly? Because, look, no matter what happens, there will be questions asked of Nigerians. How have we held up our own end of the bargain? Are we doing well in that regard?
Hello? Hello? Yes. The issue you have raised is very fundamental. The inelastic capacity of Nigerians to forget and to be very, very lackadaisical, to be redundant, to be inactive, to be passive about their rights is legendary. It's unknown to the world of democracy. Nigerian supporters, Nigerian followers, Nigerian citizens have an inertia for reacting to wrongdoing, especially by public officers. So holding public officers to account has become a function of government to government. You raised a question earlier on, how do you expect a government that sets up an agency to turn around and investigate the appointing authority? The case of Kanu is different. Where we are now is such that citizens must have to learn that it is not enough to elect somebody to office. It is also part of the duty of the citizen. As you have a right to vote, you have a right to ask questions, to interrogate the actions and policies of your people. We have not seen people sitting out because a law is badly done. We've seen just pockets of civil society groups coming from time to time to say we don't agree with the freedom of the social media law. We don't agree with that. Just a few persons who are trying to protect few and narrow interests within the polity and within the society. That Nigerian citizens whose taxes, whose burden is on a daily basis, can come out to ask a governor, where is my local government fund? For the last, it's been ages when anybody ever knew that local governments could award contracts for culverts, for repair of primary schools. We have not seen that in the last 20 years.
Okay, indeed,
just pardon me. We said it was 2003.
Just hang on, Mr. Let me bring in Mr. Rafsanjani on this.
So you then
just hang on
that
a bit.
The citizens have a duty.
Let me bring in Mr. Rafsanjani. Well, there are always questions for civil society organizations. I mean, he just spoke about that in passing. There are questions as to how they conduct themselves, if they are genuine, are they really doing this to serve the purpose and ensure we have a better society? How do you respond to that? And also, in addition to that, talk about whether or not we're doing our lot in holding our own end of the bargain.
There are so many civil society organizations in this country, and many of them, they are doing their best within the constraint of human and financial resources to carry out their job. And sometimes, they do this work under intense threat by some of the powerful, people in the society, including the security. And many a times when they try to expose corruption or they try to point out at wrongdoing, they are even referred as terrorists. They are referred as all sorts of names, by some, wicked and patriotic public official. But the Nigerian people, they know who are these civil society that are actually doing the work. They know those government civil society groups with some government official. They formed NGO to be siphoning public taxpayers' money. But trembling, in the last 28 years that I've been doing activism, let anybody point out, whether we were one of those groups or I am one of those groups that, would talk from double side. I have been consistent, and I pray to God to keep me as consistent as I had been and talking about my country, how our country will be pushed. And many Nigerians, who are doing NGO work, they do this, they are also like me. So to think that civil society groups, they are not, doing enough, or they are not makers within the constraint they find themselves, I think it's very, very unfair. Groups that are working on human rights, on accountability, on good governance are there, they are visible. You know them, and that is why, I always advise the media when they say all this coalition of NGO, let them identify which group. And when government say that they are, financing terrorism or they are supporting terrorists, I challenge them. I say, name these groups so that we know that these are bad egg and they are not real civil society groups. The real civil society groups are known even by the media.
All right, Mr. Afajani.
Civil society, and that's why you will not go and invite those faceless groups. The real civil society,
we need to go on this.
They know them.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for talking to us today. Our Rafsanjani, Executive Director for CISLAC, and Cletus Obum, former member of the Cross River State House of Assembly. Thank you both for giving us your perspectives this morning. All right, now, so we move into another matter. Well, an attempt by the federal government to resuscitate the National Theatre alongside some other activities in different states. Well, take a look at this report just to tell you a little bit more before we delve into it.
The National Theatre sits idly in the heart of Lagos, the architectural masterpiece, a national pride and custodian of the Nigerian cultural heritage, has lost its old glory. Plans to revive the old iconic building has hit the rocks in the past. With privatization on the table, the decision to let go of such monument did not sit well with some stakeholders, so the relic continued to bear its mark of wear and tear with very low revenue generation capacity. But today, history is being made with political leaders, regulators, and key players in the private sector collaborating to see the restoration of the edifice and its 134 hectares of adjoining land assets.
Mr. President has clearly demonstrated that he recognizes that a renovated National Art Theatre and the complementary facilities that will be created along with it will help in unleashing the creative talents of Nigeria's youths across multiple sectors and in supporting his objective of creating new employment opportunities for Nigerians.
Okay, so at least some perspective on that matter. Well, this morning we've got Atuyota Akpobame, who is the chairman, Federal Creative Industry Committee. Well, in case you're wondering who I'm talking about, you know him as Ali Baba. He joins us this morning. Good morning and thank you for joining us. I've been wondering, okay, what's happening here? I want to see you.
with the names, right?
Yes, they're just, I could have confused a lot of people on that one. But good to see you and good to have you on this morning. Well, this plan by the federal government, it's about time. Creative industry, of course, it has huge capacity in terms of revenue generation for the country and materials that it can export to the world in terms of repairing Nigeria's image. Now, you chair this committee that is doing something. Give us a background. What's going on with your committee? What's happening?
All right, so the first thing that the minister said was that there was need to first aggregate the value proposition in the industry. There was need to understand what needs to be done. There's so many people who are in the sector that are not covered, and most times when something needs to be done, they are excluded from the scheme of things. I'll just draw an attention to something before I hinge on it again. Recently, the National Sustainability Roadmap was made for the country, and it included a lot of other ministers and excluded the Minister for Information and Culture, forgetting that the creative sector is the second largest employer of labor, after agric. So what it means is that the bulk of your youth, about 88% of the youth are involved in the creative sector. It could be in advertising, it could be in architecture, it could be in movie production, it could be in computer designs and all of that. So all of that has been ignored. And this just highlights it again, that maintenance and development of the creative sector is not in the forefront of the plans of the government of the day. And so Lai Mohammed, the Honorable Minister, has seen that there's need for this to be done. And so he told us to look into the sector and advise the government on what to do. And we did that exactly, and which was what the committee was set up for.
So this initial 25 billion, so we understand in about 18 months, this center will be completed. How do they plan to replicate the same thing in some other states? I think they talked about Kano, Port Harcourt, and some other states.
Okay. So the first thing is that this is not just about renovation of the National Theatre alone. It's about creating jobs. It's about adding economic value. It's about saving a natural heritage, a place like this. It's just like, you see, most times we forget that when you set up a place like this, it's not just about the culture anymore. It becomes a hub for development of a lot of things, ideas, cultural exchange, economic empowerment, because people will be working there, people will get jobs, there'll be a lot of things that will be developed. So I expect that this should also be replicated, not build a national theatre again about this size, but just maintain this. And so the plan is the 25 billion would go into restoring this to its point of glory, but also developing the fallow land that's around it. Don't forget that. And I'd like this to sink in. You know that the National Theatre was built on a swamp. And after that, all the land around it, most of the places you see that is green is actually interlocking. It was parking, except for the water area. So this is going to be something for social development. And across the country, this will then be the trigger point that then drives all the changes across the country. So the federal government's plan is to make sure that this one triggers the response that they've been craving, because a lot of economic backbones do not want to support the creative sector because they don't see the value proposition in it. And so this is just to kickstart that. And it's good that the CBN is also driving other banks to achieve it. But I believe that in the next 4 or 5 years, this project will begin to yield fruits. In fact, nearly in the first year, it will begin to yield fruits.
Okay, we'll come back to this when we return from this break and get your concluding thoughts about what to expect moving forward. Stay with us. All right, welcome back. Our concluding moments. Now, let me bring you back a little bit on this one. Yes, it's a PPP, two-phase project. First part is the center itself. Then the second part where the private sector will be involved in developing the fallow lands. And then they say it's going to create jobs. I think they say about 2,000 jobs. So, but in terms of this industry, now, assuming in 18, or they say maximum 22 months, they will bring Mr. President to walk him around, show him this has been completed. In terms of treating that industry as a proper business, now, what is that structure there at the moment when this is over and done with? Can we then say, look, their facilities, the financial structure, so that young people, that industry can thrive on its own? Is that there, or how far away are we from getting there?
Well, the thing is that the industry is there, the structure is there. It just needs to be activated. When you talk about the National Theatre in the first place, you know that in about, I think in the last 5 years, cinemas have been springing up everywhere. But do you know the National Theatre actually has more screens than the ones that were started with in this country? The National Theatre has a radio station and a television station, which was all abandoned. The National Theatre is a home for music, home for visual art, home for drama, home for history, photography, culture, publishing, writers, tourism, architecture, movies. That is what the National Theatre is for. Fashion, events, concerts, and in all of these, there's so much, even culinary art. In all of these, it is that our attention has just been moved to the low-hanging fruit, which is crude oil. You sell it, get money, and spend it. So we have not really invested in it. If you look at it, a direct comparison would be like something like the Eiffel Towers. The Eiffel Tower in Paris feeds the whole of Paris, because the people that come to see the Eiffel Tower will stay in a hotel. They will buy food in a restaurant. They will go to a bar. They will do shopping. They will go to the Eiffel Tower. They'll take pictures. So photography, taxi, all of these then get driven by just the Eiffel Towers. So what we're saying is the creative sector, the creative industry has a lot of potentials, but we just need it to be ignited. We need people to move it forward, but we need people who will come in and invest. All the investors in Nigeria don't look at that area at all. So when you even talk about, which is why I mentioned even the federal government itself, when it came to creating a sustainability roadmap immediately after COVID, did not involve the Minister for Information and Culture. What I'm trying to say is that the potentials are there. There's a lot that we can do. The jobs can be created. The economic value is limitless. Above all, it is that the potentials that we have in the sector will employ youth, will make us great, will draw people to Nigeria and create economic progress.
All right,
we know that is what will happen. And in the end, a lot more youths will be employed. Don't forget that I mentioned that it is the second largest employer. This will just add to the number.
Well, we'll be looking forward to that, such that, a lot of other jobs and young people, the entertainment industry, more revenue. They say about 20 billion. That's the capacity that this can attract to the country. Thank you for talking to us. We wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.
All right, so there you go. That is the program today. We thank you all for watching, and we're hoping that you have yourselves a very good Friday. Circumstances notwithstanding. I'm Chamberlain also. Yeah, my boy's supposed to be somewhere there. My boy disappeared on us now. Okay.
Well, I'm here now, finally. Just catching the closing moments.
All right, then. So we'll see you all next week then.